Hello and welcome to this Swayam MOOC course on Indian economics. And today we are going to discuss about one of the important chapters of Indian economics, titled Agricultural Sector and Employment Generation in India in Recent Times. Now, before going into detail of this chapter, at first let's try to understand what are the learning objectives of this particular chapter. Now, after completion of this particular chapter, the students will be able to understand how the agricultural sector in India has gone through a sort of structural transformations over time and how this structural transformation has implications for cultivators' perception regarding agriculture as the sustainable way of living for the future. Second, how the agricultural labor market has changed over time. And thirdly, what are the causes behind the recent growth of non-farm income opportunities in the rural sector of the nation. Now, apart from this, students will be also able to understand how in agrarian economy, from subsistence farming, there is a shift towards commercial farming, and what are the causes behind the recent development of feminization of agriculture. Now, to start with, we all know that agriculture is the lifeline of Indian economy that keeps the economy going and growing. Now, the role of agriculture in Indian economy is not only important for propelling economic growth, feeding the burgeoning population of the nation, alleviating poverty and malnutrition problem, supplying the essential raw materials for the agro-based industries, and also to ensure a sort of vibrant rural economy by raising farmers' income. About two-thirds of the population of the nation, they resides in the rural sector of the economy, and agriculture and allied sector is the livelihood of most of them. Now, let's try to understand what types of structural transformation has occurred in recent times in Indian agricultural sectors. Here we are going to discuss about some important dimensions where we can see some noticeable changes have occurred. The first point that we can talk about is that there is a perverse trend in the structural transformation if we observe in the agricultural sector of the economy. Now, we all know for a less developed nation, the agricultural sector predominates. Most of the less developed nations in the world are agrarian economies in which agricultural sector have major contributions not only in national income or GDP but also in the employment prospect. But according to the structural economists like Chenery, Clark, Fisher, Kuznets, etc., as this less developed nation goes on the process of economic development, the share of agriculture not only in GDP and national income starts to decline, as well as in employment opportunities that starts to decline, and that of non-agricultural sector gets the prominence. But if we observe the case of Indian economy, then some perverse structural transformation has happened. During 1950-51, about 57% of our GDP, agriculture actually contributes about 57% of our GDP. That has reduced to 14.2% very recently. But no such corresponding structural transformation has occurred in case of the occupation structure. At that time, there was about 70% of the national population. They dependent upon agriculture for their livelihood. And recently, this percentage has reduced down only to 52%. One of the possible reasons for this is the very slow occupational shift from agriculture to other sectors of the economy. The second important factor that I want to mention in this connection is the marginalization of peasantry. Now, over time, the agricultural land holdings have been substantially fragmented and subdivided due to three important causes. The first one is the burgeoning growth of population. The second one is the subdivision of land properties among the families. And the third one is a very slow occupational shift from agriculture to other sectors of the economy. Now, due to this slow occupational shift from agriculture to other sectors of the economy and lack of employment opportunities created outside agricultural sector, a sizable section of the growing population had to bank upon agriculture for their livelihood. Now, that has effectively created a overcrowding in agriculture and thereby reducing the land-man ratio. The average size of landholdings that was used to be about 2 hectares during 1970-71, that has reduced to 1.2 hectares during 2010-11. And it is also important to note in this connection that about 85% of the farmers in the nations are categorized as small and marginal farmers having the landholding size less than or equal to 2 hectares, and they operate about 44% of the operational holdings of the nation. The third important factor that I want to mention in this connection is the substantial growth of agricultural laborers in the total agricultural workers of the nation. Now, since independence, this is the first time in the 2011 census report we find that the number of agricultural laborers are outstripping the number of cultivators. And according to the 2011 census data, now the agricultural laborers, they compose about 55% of the total agricultural workers in the nation. Now, there could be different reasons for this growth of agricultural laborers. The first one is obviously due to the fact that since the land holdings are being subdivided and fragmented over time, the cultivation in these small plots of lands are unviable. As a result, a sizable section of cultivators, they are selling out their lands and migrating to the other states or urban centers for better employment opportunities. And even in the rural sector, we can find that the female agricultural workers, they are actually going towards the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee schemes, where the 100 days of work guarantee is being provided. So as a result, agricultural laborers are growing in a rapid pace. So what the problem that arises because of the peak season, due to the lack of agricultural laborers in some of the states, the agricultural wage rate is going up. And in certain cases, to tackle the situation, the cultivators are adopting mechanized farming. The fourth important factor that I want to mention in this connection is the shift from subsistence farming to commercial farming. Now, over time, the consumer's preference, their dietary pattern has changed. Now they are moving from cereals to high protein value foods, and as a result, what is happening? The farmers' cultivation is also trying to match up with the changing customer demands. So the demand for livestock products, particularly meat, fish, eggs, they have increased in a substantial way. Now, as a result of this shift from subsistence farming to commercial farmings, the production of some core cereals is going down, and the production of high value foods, the horticultural products, fruits, they are actually growing in a significant way. And if we look at the database, then we will find that during 1970s, where about 75% of the land holdings of the nation were devoted for food grains production, it has been reduced to only 63% recently. Another aspect that I want to mention in this connection is the declining productivity. Now, we all know that developing nations like India, agricultural productivity is critical not only to ensure a vibrant growth of the nation, ensuring reduction in poverty and malnutrition problem, but also this is important for stimulating the other agro-based industries of the nation. But in terms of this agricultural productivity, India's performance for the last few years has not been quite satisfactory. If you look at the slide, you will see that the growth rate of agricultural GDP, which was hovering around 3.72% during the period of time 2004-5 to 2014-15, that has been significantly being reduced in recent years during 2015-16 to 2018-19 by about only 2.4%. Now, this reduction in agricultural productivity has significant implications for the food security of the burgeoning population of the nation and also for the food price led inflation. Now, this particular issue that also assumes a pertinent recent time because of the fact that according to the Global Hunger Index 2019, India's position has slipped down to 102nd out of 117 nations in the world, and India is trailing behind some of its Southeast Asian neighbors like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, etc. Now, one of the major reasons behind this low productivity has been the declining public investment in agricultural sector, not only to develop the agrarian infrastructure, but also in research and development. The second important issue regarding insufficient sources of formal credit in the rural sector. There is a huge exclusion, financial exclusion in the rural sector. So farmers are not getting loans at a relatively cheaper rate of interest, and they have to recourse to informal sources of credit. The third important issue regarding this low productivity is obviously lack of infrastructural facilities. The fourth one is obviously the poor, agricultural marketing schemes that is prevalent in the nation. In this particular case, that the final products, when they are actually coming to the market, in between the producers and final products, there is a long chain of intermediaries, and most of the value added by the farmers are being eaten up by these intermediaries. There are problems regarding the storehousing facilities, the rural roads, and all of these are affecting farmers' income considerably. The next important factor is the half-hearted trying or designing of the land reform policies that government has tried to implement over the years. And obviously, in recent time, there has been the severe droughts between 2015-16 to 2018-19 that have significantly impacted the agrarian production in recent times. The next important factor that I want to mention in this connection is the phenomenal growth of rural non-farm employment. Now, over the last 2 decades, this rural non-farm employment has grown in a significant way, and according to the NSSO and Rural India Development Report, about 43% of the rural households now they are engaged in different sorts of rural non-farm income activities. Now, these rural non-farm income sources are actually being able to absorb the surplus labor from the agricultural sector. They can reduce the rural-urban migration, and obviously they provide a sort of cushioning during the crop failure time. Farmers can mitigate risk of cultivation, a crop failure, by earning some income from the non-farm sources of income, and obviously that can ensure a vibrant rural economy. According to Lanzhou, the rural non-farm income sector is actually includes those activities which are not farming as such, but they are very much rural, and that encompasses different types of agribusiness, commerce, then trade, then transport and communication services, financial services, etc. Now, the growth of this rural non-farm income in the nation over time can be contributed to 2 different types of factors. One, we can say the push factors. This means the farmers are being compelled to go for rural non-farm sources of income to mitigate the risk that arises out of cultivation. And second one is actually the pull factors that motivate the farmers to go through the rural non-farm income opportunities. Now, to understand this, we must understand that the farmers in India, particularly the small and marginal farmers, they are working in a world of VUCA. Here, VUCA means volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now let's try to understand how the small and marginal farmers of the nation, they are operating in the world of VUCA that we already mentioned: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now, volatility arises due to tumbling of the food prices that the farmers are actually producing. In quite often during the bumper harvest, the prices of the food crops may come to so low level that the farmers cannot raise even the minimum cost of its production. As a result, most of the cases farming is now becoming unviable. I have already mentioned in this connection that in quite often when the farmers are going to sell their output into the final market, there are a long chain of intermediaries and they are eating up most of the value added made by the farmers. So farmers are not getting the reasonable price for their product. There are also the issues regarding standardization and gradation of products. So farmers are also not getting the price corresponding to the quality they are producing. And due to the non-availability of storing facilities and the bad road conditions, farmers has to sell their products immediately after harvest because they don't have the option to keep those outputs in the storeroom. And as a result, they are selling it at whatever price it fetches. So that's why quite often farmers are not getting the right price for their product. Now, this one of the way by which government is trying to redress the problem is actually the minimum support price policy. But it is also unfortunate that in many states and for many crops, this minimum support price has not been implemented properly. So farmers are living in a world of volatility. The second important factor is the uncertainty. Now, agriculture is a typical business in which weather is the most critical input in farm production. And quite often, due to uncertainty of the weather events, particularly hailstorms, droughts, floods, and unseasonal rains, these are hampering agricultural production in a tremendous way. Now, this problem has been further aggravated by the fact that in most of the cases, farmers are also not getting the adequate formal sources of credit. As a result, they have to bank upon the money lenders and informal sources of credit suppliers in the rural sector for their for their credit needs, and they usually charge exorbitantly high rate of interest. And if there is a crop failure, the farmers have to sell their lands and their properties, etc., and they sink into the burden of debt. And one of the important manifestation of this debt crisis has recently occurred in terms of unending chain of farmer suicides in recent times in different parts of the nation. Now, one way to mitigate this problem related to production risk is obviously the crop insurance. Now, Government of India has implemented crop insurance programs since independence. From 1972 to 2016, different types of crop insurance programs are in practice. Right now, Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana is also being implemented from 2016. But the major problem is that most of the cases, farmers are unaware about the benefits that they can get out of these crop insurance schemes. And secondly, even if they are aware, the uptake of this crop insurance program in the nation is very poor. So they are actually struggling in a world of uncertainty. The farming is becoming complex over time due to shrinking farm sizes, rising cost of cultivation, declining soil health, and obviously depleting groundwater levels. So, making this farming practice totally unviable, and quite often farmers are migrating towards non-farm sources of income. And finally, there is ambiguity in the sense that farmers cannot always perceive the yield distributions of the modern technology utilized in the farming practices. I can give you one example regarding this. During the time of 1960s, India was suffering from acute food crisis. And one way to mitigate that crisis at that time was the introduction of a new agricultural techniques in which high-yielding varieties of seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, and water package was being utilized, and that miracle high-yielding varieties of seeds actually resulted in green revolution in mid-60s. Now, when the new technology was implemented, now it was perceived that this will cure the problem of hunger and low production in the nation. And obviously, India has achieved self-sufficiency in production of certain items like rice and wheat, etc. But later on, according to environmentalists, we find that this green revolution technology was not ecologically sustainable. The seeds that were being produced at that time, particularly the genetically modified seeds, they're having very weak gene code and more prone to pest attack than the traditional robust varieties. And the new seeds were extremely thirsty, and as a result, nowadays, in most of the cases, in most of the states where this genetically modified cropping has been in practice, they are suffering from acute water crisis. So these are the issues, all of which we can say the push factors that forces the farmers to go towards non-farm sources of income to make a way of their livelihood. But there are also some pull factors that also motivate farmers to go towards these non-farm sources of income. Firstly, some other employment opportunities that are available in the urban sector. There are also a development of township that is, in the borderline of some rural sector and urban sector, and different types of service provision is being generated in those townships where the non-farm sources of income can be reaped. So this is a way of pull factor that is motivating farmers to go for non-farm sources of income. And another important factor is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, where the 100 days of work has been guaranteed, and farmers are migrating towards those activities to have a sort of stable, sustained income for the long run. Now, the last point that I want to mention in this connection is actually feminization of agriculture. There's an interesting observation that we find in Indian agriculture is that female are increasingly participating in agricultural activities, not only as cultivators, but also as agricultural laborers. Now, there can be different reasons behind the increasing participation of females in agricultural activity. The firstly, because of the fact that agriculture is now becoming much more intensified, and that's why much more labor is needed. The second one is the commercial nature of farming. The third one is that in certain cases, if agriculture is not fetching good return, then the male counterpart of the family, they are migrating towards the cities or other villages or even in other states for other more lucrative job options, and females are being there to continue the cultivation activity. Now, according to the recent reports that we can find, that between 1991 to 2011, about 85%, about 85 million agricultural workers have entered into the workforce, and women accounting for 49 million out of this, which means about 58%. And from 1991 to 2011, within this 20-year span of time, where the participation of male agricultural workers have fallen by 3 million, that has, in case of the female, agricultural workers, you will find they had increased by 14.2 million. Now, in most cases, this increase in female participation in agricultural activities sometimes being thought of as a sort of empowering the women in rural India, but that has not been the case. Because if we also go through the survey reports of different government organizations, then you will find that only 14% of the all agricultural holdings in India are being owned by the women. And due to this lack of ownership, they are getting too much hardship to get the proper collateral problem in case of seeking loans from the formal institutes or getting subsidies regarding fertilizers and other essential inputs. and as well as to get the benefits from different government programs like PM Kishan, etc., that requires that the land that requires that the beneficiaries must be the landowner. So most of the cases, after fulfilling all the domestic needs, domestic activities, the females are being forced to participate in agricultural activities without getting recognition in true sense of the term, and obviously the income that they are also getting is relatively lower than the male counterpart. So according to many economists, that is actually a case of not only feminization of agriculture but feminization of poverty. Now, to conclude, we can say that we have experienced a sort of unprecedented corona pandemic in recent times, not only in India, but it has affected the global economy in a major way. But agriculture is probably the only sector that has been shown a sort of bright spot compared to other sectors of the economy that have performed relatively better. And obviously, agricultural sector was relatively insulated from the crisis-prone situation, but it also performed better in terms of employment generation, according to the CMI report, Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. Now, there was initially being some sorts of problem in agricultural sector during the lockdown announcements of the government to check the spread of the lethal virus, but that was being mostly felt in case of transport of agricultural products in different mandis, or getting the essential raw materials or seeds or fertilizers that happened during that lockdown time. But overall, thanks to the good monsoon and obviously better performance of the agriculture has helped the economy to regain the momentum of its growth over time. Now, if we look at the CMI's data in the year 2020-21, then we will find that when the overall economy, there was a problem of unemployment, and actually the employment prospects were doomed. It was reduced by about 21%, the unemployment rate increased. The agricultural sector has shown some good prospect, where in the year 2019-20, agricultural sector employed an additional 3.1 million new workers. Now, most of the cases, these are the workers, they have been migrated from urban sector to rural sector. There was a sort of reverse migration of workers during that lockdown time. So when they came back to their native villages, they had to perform the agricultural activities, and most of the cases, their inclusion had not been increased the agricultural output to a significant extent, and that's why they can be classified as disguisedly unemployed. So this is all about the issues that I have discussed in this particular chapter. Now, the students are requested to go through the handouts very in detail, and there are lots of questions have been asked for your practice, for your better understanding, and by solving all those questions, trying to figure out the answers, you will better grasp this particular chapter. Thank you all.